My name is Zach Semke. I am director of Passive House Accelerator and really excited everyone has joined us today. This is Passive House Accelerator Live, where we explore how to slash the greenhouse gas emissions from our buildings and make us more resilient to the impacts of climate change. And today is a next up episode of Passive House Accelerator Live. Now, typically our co-hosts for Next Up are Zoe Kaufman and Carmel Pratt. Both Zoe and Carmel are at the FIAS Pro Forum in Providence, Rhode Island today. Today is day 3 of the Pro Forum there. And so they are not able to join us. So Kim and Michael and I will be playing the role of co-host today as we dive into landing your first decarb project. So we're super excited about this. We're joined by Heather McKinstry and Shefali Sanghvi. Heather is the studio director, or is a studio director and senior associate at Dattner Architects. She believes that architecture's most important role is to create inclusive, healthy, and sustainable environments for our communities, helping to build a more equitable world. After completing her thesis on disaster relief housing, her commitment to environmentalism and community-focused urbanism led her to creating spaces for all New Yorkers while minimizing the environmental impact of new buildings. Shefali Sanghvi, who also co-hosts our Project of the Month series at Passive House Accelerator Live, serves as a thought leader across Dattner Architects studios and beyond, championing sustainability as integral to architecture. As the firm's director of sustainability, she establishes the direction of Dattner's research and leads the exploration and application of sustainability in-house by facilitating knowledge sharing amongst project teams, firm leadership, and Dattner's professional development groups. Shefali has over 19 years of experience working in sustainable projects with an emphasis on resiliency, occupant health and comfort, and energy efficiency. An expert on urban passive house projects, she's dedicated to designing buildings that are socially, environmentally, and financially sustainable. So with that, Heather and Shefali, please take it away.
Thanks, Zach. I think that top bar keeps coming down when the chat is very active, but we're just gonna hopefully ignore it and hope Zoom figures it out. But
all good, all good.
Okay. So thanks everyone for joining today. Of course, now nothing is working. Let's do this. Okay. So Heather and I, as Zach mentioned, we're at Dattner Architects. We're a mission-driven civic architecture firm, and we are a frequent guest at Passive House Accelerator. So I'm sure you've heard either Heather or I speak at something recently. We did a whole dry run and everything was working. Anyway, here we are. So our practice is focused on 3 studios. We have a transportation and infrastructure studio. We have an education, healthcare, cultural kind of work studio. And then we have a housing studio. Our housing studio is primarily affordable multifamily housing projects. And that's really what we're going to focus on today. Our clients are typically profit or not-for-profit developers, and we do these presentations to them when they're asking us, why should we pursue passive house? Sometimes there's a CM on board early on in the process, and we do ask that they also attend these meetings so that we can reinforce the idea of this integrated process, and also as a way to ensure that any concerns are like addressed head on at this very initial phase where we're laying the groundwork of why passive house is critical to a project. So we start with a brief primer on what passive house is. Obviously, we are not going to do that for this group, but we use this as an opportunity to focus on the conversation that this is a building performance standard versus more of a prescriptive checklist-based certification like LEED. And we try to highlight the fact that this is really about trade-offs and how the building performs overall, rather than just one thing and kind of getting points based on this thing that you may or may not be able to achieve. We then take a minute to talk about energy use intensity and, talking about this as a way to measure energy performance and how we work with passive house consultants to predict energy consumption based on the trade-offs that we would be doing for their particular project. Basically, this is a way to show to clients that these buildings really do perform better than national and city averages. So on the left hand here, we have the national median, then we have the New York City median, and then we have kind of a snip of projects that are completed or under construction, so that we can talk about like, this is work that we've done. And we like to, when we can, show both site and source EUI to show that we're really paying attention not only to the energy use intensity of the project itself, but also about transmission and kind of integration of on-site solar, on-site renewables. And then we show this very intentionally dense slide, because the goal here is to take these clients and hopefully the GC on this journey with us. We want to lay the groundwork of what you have to do based on code, right? Which is really what this slide represents, and what additional items are needed to get to passive house, demonstrating that this is kind of like an incremental increase. So we talk here about some of the policy changes that have happened at the city level over the last 20 or so years that pushes us towards full electrification, reduction of carbon emissions, that we're really kind of from a policy point of view already backing into passive house projects. When we talk about this project, we don't read off each thing. Obviously, we really focus on what's on the right side of the slide. We talk about under the Climate Mobilization Act that was passed at the end of 2019, that local law 92 and 94 really pushes for, it gives us the opportunity, requires that there's either green roofs or photovoltaics on roofs. So that we can sort of say like, yes, you're doing full electric, but you also have this requirement to do potentially just PV and help offset some of that cost. Local law 97, which provides or sort of provides these carbon taxes based on your carbon emissions, based on your energy source. In 2021, local law 154 was passed that really pushes for requires full building electrification except for backup power generation. And even though there's a staggered timeline for affordable housing, based on the timelines of the projects that we're talking about that sometimes take 3 to 5 years to get started from the point we're having this initial conversation with our clients, that timeline doesn't really help us. And so to kind of like say, oh, we won't do full electrification, we'll deal with it if we have to, we explain could potentially provide additional costs for the client as the project progresses. And then recently passed regulations like City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality provides potential zoning bonuses for energy efficient buildings, which really speaks to the client's bottom line about providing more floor area. And for some of our clients, it means they're providing more units that help make the finances of a project more palatable, especially because when we're talking about affordable housing, it still costs a lot of money, but you sort of have to do this tough financial, you have to play this tough financial game to make sure that the project is actually maintainable. And then there's the provision for noise designations. These noise designations are provided to sites that the city has determined has significant noise pollution concerns. So as a result, the project has to provide an alternate means of ventilation for residential tenants, so fresh air can be provided even when the windows are closed. So again, we've laid the groundwork from a policy point of view of what's required. I wish there was a way to turn the chat off. But then we talk about what is specific to affordable housing, because again, that's really the types of clients that we deal with in our housing studio, or basically the bulk of the projects that we do in our housing studio. So in New York City, the creation of affordable housing is supported by the New York City Housing Preservation and Development. And they have obviously very robust design guidelines that talk about not only the size of the units and the spaces within those units, but also what kind of amenities are being provided, how are we demonstrating access to natural light and natural air. They also have sustainability guidelines where they mandate full electrification, right? Taking away that argument of having to go towards full electrification. They mandate the inclusion or kind of that you have to certify with Enterprise Green Communities, which, as we all know, is this national affordable housing sustainability guideline. And then recommend as a reach goal that projects pursue passive house certification. They're also kind of like really cognizant of what some of the arguments are against actually paying for certification, so that they say like, and some of the sticking points from making that jump from a code compliant building to a passive house building. So for example, one of the things that we often hear is having to provide mechanical ventilation is an additional cost that projects can't bear. So HPD mandates that if you're saying that your project is passive house certifiable, right, where I'm going to do all of these things that I'm not going to pay for certification, and I'm not going to do the mechanical ventilation and the ERVs. HPD says that if you're going to say that, then you have to provide the ERVs. At the state level, the agency that supports the creation of affordable housing is the Department of Homes and Community Renewal. Similar to HPD, they have design and sustainability guidelines, and part of their sustainability guidelines has this path to electrification, and like kind of has these timelines for electrification and decarbonization and carbon neutrality that I think is just like a helpful visual. And we often use these visuals with the appropriate credit to kind of just show clients in a very easy to understand way that their choices are kind of limited as we talk about these projects in the future. Their sustainability guidelines have these sort of stages. They're set up in stages. So there's the core sustainability requirements, and within that, there's the base requirements and the stretch goal requirements. And one of the stretch goals is passive house certification. So if you select that stretch goal, you can kind of see that you, by and large, are able to skip section 2 and go to section 3, which again, we use as a way to support convincing our clients to do passive house certification. Because the section 2 of building performance requirements are kind of very prescriptive and in many ways requires us to do everything that we would do for passive house without the benefit of the third-party verification or the certification itself.
Okay, so after talking about all the regulatory reasons that make passive house more and more within reach, we present some of our success stories. So this is a project you might have seen or heard about before on Passive House Accelerator. It's 425 Grand Concourse. It's a 26-story building with 277 units of affordable housing in the Bronx. It's a cast-in-place structure with CMU backup wall, brick at the podium, and metal panel at the tower. Thanks to the dense nature of multifamily development and our location in New York City, we are cooling load dominated. And with the form factor of this building, we didn't need a huge amount of insulation above what's required by code. So you can see here, we only have R30 at our roof and R20 at our exterior walls. Instead, it was really important for us to focus on low E coatings at the windows, continuous air sealing, and solar shading to keep those cooling loads down. So this is a pretty atypical building for us and for affordable housing in New York City. But we were able to achieve passive house here. And when we were in design, this was the tallest passive house building in North America and the largest passive house building that had been certified by FIAS. So this was really kind of like a project to show that it could be done on this scale. Along the way, we were able to win the NYSERDA Buildings of Excellence Award, which really helps kind of make this all happen. And then we show Santa Ana Gardens, which is much more like a typical affordable housing project you'll see in New York City. It's block and plank with brick and some metal panel at the facade. And you can see it's directly adjacent to the elevated train, which means really noisy, and there's a little E designation for sound on the site. So that means there are some requirements about mechanical systems, that there needs to be mechanical ventilation. It also comes with some requirements for facade sound attenuation. So that means that we already were going to have high quality windows here, and we couldn't utilize through wall PTAC units for our heating and cooling. So that kind of made passive house an easier reach. We already had some of these items that were going to be required for this site. Here we also maximize the solar array on the roof. And we showed this in a variety of passive house buildings to show that passive house doesn't dictate the architectural design, right? This is a very different building than 425 Grand Concourse. Not every developer wants to or is able to or is going to build a 26-story tower, but this is a really typical typology for affordable housing in New York City. So we want to show, passive house doesn't have to look a certain way. There's a lot we can do and still meet those standards.
And, Chestnut Commons is a 274 unit, 14-story affordable housing project with a kind of like robust community-based programming at its base. And when we talk about these projects, we like to identify distinguishing factors for each of them that indicate a challenge and our ability to overcome that challenge. Because I think like that's really what it is. That's the path, that's what we want to reinforce to the client, that this isn't necessarily going to be easy, especially if it's your first time, but together we can come to a solution that kind of works within the confines of budget and timeline. So for this particular project, we like to emphasize that it was the contractor's first passive house project. And so we were really able to leverage our internal experience to help the GC with more day-to-day questions that came up, or day-to-day feedback. Not in a way to replace the passive house consultant, who is obviously very crucial to the success of these projects, but to be able to be an immediate resource, to be able to like answer questions when we're on site in a way that, or like flag issues that we might see that may need to be caught prior to the passive house consultant coming up or coming to site for their third-party verification. Additionally, this project was our first with a stud backup wall. So we were able to demonstrate that we're able to pass lower door tests with stud backup wall. Here you can see the envelope performance is higher than code, and we want to be open and upfront about that with the client so that, when they're looking at dollar signs, we're acknowledging that some of this may be required. But because we had the stud backup walls, we were able to provide both continuous insulation and insulation between the studs to really maximize the overall thermal performance of the building without impacting, excuse me, wall thickness, which obviously impacts unit sizes and our potential to fit units into the building, which again speaks to the client's bottom line. And then the last project we highlight is Vinyl Brookdale, and this is really just a quick recap of our completed passive house projects. For this project, we like to highlight that it's unique because similar to Grand Concourse, but in a very different sort of way, it's a little atypical to the types of affordable housing projects we build in New York City, in the sense that it is a kind of like lower rise, 8-story, very long project, right? It's 2 buildings. Each building is about 350 feet long. So here our challenges was really the form factor, and it really forced us to look at where we were facing the biggest amount of heat loss, and so pushed us to this R70 at the roof. So really, again, acknowledging what the challenges are, saying how did we address these challenges, and saying that we were, R70 might seem significant and might be this cost impact, but by shifting the roof insulation to R70, we were able to save a lot more money by avoiding having to provide triple pane or even higher performing windows and storefronts for this project. Also, this project was with a for-profit developer. So if we do have a client that is for-profit and may not be as mission-driven, we like to explain that we have done this work with not only not-for-profit developers rather, but also. So we talk about all of these projects and we kind of lay the groundwork to demonstrate, we make this case for our expertise in passive house and also obviously our design skills. We are, after all, architects. But we highlight these 4 projects that don't necessarily look exactly the same. And then we like to take a minute about what it is that is different, what it is about a passive house project that is different from a typical project. So this is also a time for us to really bring the GC into the conversation. We want them to be on this journey with us. And so we talk a little bit here about, yes, the devil is in the details, and we pay a lot of attention to all of our details and every part of our details, and work with the passive house consultant to make sure that we're addressing all of these potentials for thermal bridging, and we've really thought about how this thermal boundary around our building is being drawn. But then the success also has to translate into how that building is constructed. And we really need the GC to be on board with that. And so in many ways, having the GC on this call and to be part of this discussion early on means that we hope kind of eliminates their questioning after the fact and gives them the kind of backup that they need when their subs come to them saying, I've never really done this way. This is going to add so much time or so much labor. Why am I really doing it? And they understand the importance of this. And they understand, like, you know, again, just looking back at that previous slide with the details that we're eliminating thermal bridging, we're showing continuous insulation, and that, you know, this idea is that not only are we designing with intent, we're building with intent, and we're really emphasizing to the client that you're going to get what you pay for.
So one of the things that we talk about with our clients is the importance of third-party verification. It's really great when we get a project manager from the contracting team who's really excited about Passive House, really knowledgeable, and we're seeing that more and more, which is great. But we also need the people who are rolling on the liquid applied air barrier and installing the insulation to understand what we're working towards. So having a third party on site means we know the details are going to get built per the drawings and specifications. Having the Passive House overlay makes for really robust oversight during construction. And that's, you know, through the Passive House certification process. Kind of the last thing we want our client to say is, okay, you know, we're in for the air barrier and the insulation and the ERV. We'll do everything, but we don't want to get certified. There are some additional costs just in the certification process. But this oversight is really critical to the success of the project. It's really easy to start chipping away little by little, eating these little items. But this is a really holistic system and we need kind of every part of it. And that third-party verification ensures that it all gets done the way it needs to get done. And then we get to the thing that sets Passive House apart from other sustainability certification systems. And that's the fact that it's a performance-based system, and we get to test the performance with the whole building blower door test. We like this as architects because it's one of the few times we get to test our hypothesis about building design. But for clients, this is also a way to show them that the building being delivered to them is meeting the performance goals that we've all agreed to. They don't have to take our word for it. They can look at the blower test results and see it right in front of them. We also talk to clients about doing guarded blower door tests before construction is complete so that we can test the facade before the whole building is enclosed, kind of identify areas for improvement and make those improvements along the way before we get to whole building blower door test. And beyond energy savings, we talk to our clients about other benefits to building residents in our Passive House buildings. So these are some of the interior and exterior spaces at our Passive House projects. You can see we have nice big windows. They get lots of natural light. And the bottom left is an apartment, and you can see they just have that one little unit that provides heating and cooling. They, of course, have a constant flow of filtered fresh air. And in New York City, that's particularly important. Some of the communities we serve have some of the highest asthma rates in the entire country. So having fresh air that's pollen and pollution free helps the residents that have asthma and allergies and anybody just feel their best when they're at home. Our buildings also provide amenity spaces like the community rooms seen at the top of this slide and a large courtyard on the bottom right. So again, we're talking about how Passive House is not dictating aesthetics and we're creating these beautiful spaces and within the requirements of a Passive House building. And then this is usually the last slide of our presentation to clients, which we use to drive home the point of the marketability of Passive House. So we talk to them about, you know, the benefits of filtered fresh air, but also of truly quiet living quarters. You know, noise is becoming a really important issue that's being identified, and it's really important here in New York City. We talk to them about thermal and humidity comfort. We talk about resiliency and the ability for tenants to shelter in place during a disaster or a blackout. Because they're going to have that thermal comfort for longer. We talk about the recent wildfires and how having a really tight building envelope and earth filters on the ERVs means that in the Passive House building, those tenants are still having fresh air even when the air outside is pretty bad. And we talk about how Passive House helps reduce pests and therefore pesticide use inside of buildings by being really well sealed against infestation. And for this presentation, we just want to wrap up with one of our newer Passive House projects in design and talk about how with this client, because some of the things we've talked about already about, you know, electrification and some of the code requirements and some of the other benefits, this client was pretty on board with Passive House. It was a pretty quick conversation about what are the benefits, and they were pretty ready to go. But we kept talking to them about other sustainability issues that we care deeply about that aren't part of Passive House, but I think, you know, are really important for sustainability. So this is in design right now. It is the second phase of a project we've been working on West 108th Street on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It is for a nonprofit developer, West Side Federation for Senior and Supportive Housing. And for us, this is a relatively small building. It's 12 stories and 84 apartments. It's located on a narrow street and there's no site constraints, so it'll be cast in place with a metal stud backup wall and brick facade. So in the years since our first crop of Passive House buildings, there's been a big push to reduce the amount of refrigerant we're using on site. So we are going to use through wall PTHPs here. And one of the things we've been working diligently on and working with manufacturers on is the detailing for that sleeve to prevent air infiltration. These clients are also the service providers for the tenants of this building, and they're planning to pay for cooling as well as heating. Cooling is becoming a bigger and bigger topic in New York City as nighttime temperatures rise with climate change. So cooling centers are no longer an effective strategy. And the effects of heat can be more acutely felt by seniors. So it's really important for this client in this building. There's also a focus in this project on using low embodied carbon materials, including low embodied carbon concrete for our superstructure, and reducing the amount of plastics that are used here by looking at natural flooring materials like cork instead of LVT and aluminum windows instead of UPVC. Finally, as a senior project, this is all studios and 1-bedrooms. But because Wishfish is also the service provider, they know their clients really well, and they know how hard it is for some people to accept having a home health aide in their apartment, particularly if they're in a studio and that home health aide is going to be right in their face, right in their space all the time. So here we've prioritized creating as many 1-bedrooms as possible without reducing our total number of apartments, and putting the studio apartments so they face the adjacent park space to the west, and they have an additional window that overlooks that park. And we've also created these kind of dining niches in the entry area so that there's a space where somebody else who's working in their home can sit and not be, you know, sitting on their bed. So this building leveraged these sustainable design features and recently won the NYSERDA Future Housing Initiatives Award. So it's kind of, again, the next step in showing that there's continued benefits to including these sustainable initiatives in our projects. So we're really excited that even on our Passive House projects, we're finding new ways to reduce our environmental impact and improve the lives of the people that live in them.
Yeah, and you know, I think just to kind of like wrap up this idea of once you've convinced the client to do Passive House and you've really used it as an opportunity to emphasize healthy, you know, the health benefits to the people who live in and work in our buildings, we can also talk about the other choices that we can make to further collectively our decarbonization goals and our kind of like our health-based goals. And you know, I think Wishfish 2 is a great example of that, and really just demonstrates that it's all about taking these steps and making these incremental changes that over time become really impactful, especially if you're thinking about not only the impact to your own body of work, but also if you've convinced a client to do Passive House, then they might be more likely, and if you can do it successfully, right? I mean, it's two steps, right? Not only convincing them to do it, but also completing it successfully. Then maybe they'd be more inclined to do it on their next project, and then they can kind of like that cone of influence becomes really wide. So, you know, I know that the topic today is getting your first decarb project, and obviously we rely a lot on our experience with Passive House to help convince clients to do their first Passive House project with us. But for those of us who don't necessarily have that robust Passive House experience, I do think still there's value to this idea of laying the groundwork while acknowledging, what works and what doesn't work, and kind of being open about what potential challenges are and how they can be addressed, and just making sure that it's clear to the client that you're on this journey with them, that it is this collaborative process, and that you're willing to work with everyone who is at the table to make sure that challenges are addressed, and that we can convince the client that this.
That was great.
Awesome.
Yeah, I feel like everybody should do a quick thumbs up or cheer where you are. Don't unmute, but stay on mute. But that was great. That's not a surprise. I was really looking forward to this one. We're gonna pause for a second for sponsors, but before we get to that, I wouldn't mind just jumping in. I'm gonna be running the questions today, so I'm gonna ask mine first. But the one thing I'd say, and I'd love to hear more from you on this, and then we'll go to sponsors. Your projects look great, and I just feel like it's just so important. It's the thing that makes a big difference. Everybody feels like they're going to get less when you start to talk about passive house or a lead or whatever we're going to wind up talking about. But I think that one of the things, just convincing people and looking at your first passive house, you'll have architects or developers or engineers who want to do this kind of work, who are doing already this scale of work, and they can point to your projects and saying, look, building looks great. Look, it has windows that open, and look at these. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about just kind of on the design side, because it feels like you haven't had to scrimp on that too much, which is nice. I mean, of course, we all do as architects. I'm sure you want to do something different, but that's one. And then two, I wouldn't mind hearing a little bit about just how the tenants feel about it, how, or the occupants, how, it just, again, they feel like happy, good buildings. Forget all about the performance level for a second. So I'd love to hear more about both, and then after that question, we'll go to sponsors.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say one thing. Like, I think collectively we're all in this fight together, and we really, I'm sure I've said this in one passive house accelerator event or another, but we really are standing on the giant shoulders of giants that came before us, and that when we hold on to these things like, this is my precious baby and I refuse to share it with you, like, everyone suffers. We don't get to build collective greatness that way. And so I think that, like, yeah, feel free to use our projects to show your clients that this is feasible at this scale. Like, that's what we're all here. We're all here to learn from one another and to support each other, to make sure that we're really paying attention to the impact of the built environment to climate change. So I just wanted to kind of like acknowledge that first.
Mm-hmm.
And or in terms of tenant feedback, we by and large, it's all really positive. I just want to, I saw Zach, you had asked a question about kind of like wildfires, and I know Heather mentioned that, but I really want to kind of emphasize that the tenants in our passive house projects were really inoculated from all of that wildfire smoke and dust and all of that stuff that we had said last summer. No, it's 2 summers ago. I don't remember, but whenever it was, it was really impressive. I mean, I live in kind of more old school six apartment building in New York City, and even with all of the windows closed, there was dust everywhere. It was awful. And so to be able to say that, like, when we reached out to our clients and they were like, no one's complaining, it's fine. I thought for us that felt like such a proud moment for us. And honestly, we're biased. We think we create really beautiful buildings and beautiful spaces. But when we come back to some of these buildings and we do tours of them, we also hear that people are happy to live in them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say, passive house or not passive house, what we focus on here at Dattner is a lot of affordable housing, and people who live in our buildings don't have a ton of housing choice. It's a really expensive city. They win a lottery to get in these buildings. There's something like, 40,000 people apply for 300 apartments. So when we're designing for people who don't have a lot of choice, we really feel a lot of responsibility as architects to build something that they're going to be really proud of, that they don't have choice, but they're getting something great. So that's kind of something we bring to all of our projects, that we want people to be house proud. A lot of tenants might not know everything about the ERV system or the, what's going on with the insulation. But that they come home to a beautiful home is really important to us as architects. I will say on the design side, the one detail we really struggle with is a brick return detail. We would love to do a brick return detail. We have agonized over the brick return detail and we figured out a way to do it, but it's an expensive installation. And in our affordable projects, that's something that we often are like, don't spend your money here, or like, this is not where we should spend the money. We can do a metal surround. It's gonna still look great. That is, a place where we do have to make some trade-offs in terms of design, in terms of the detailing. We can't have that thermal bridging that's created by a standard brick return. So we do look at those details and we do make some design decisions based on here's what works in the details. And yes, we can make a brick return work, but it's an expensive installation. And so it's more challenging to get done at affordable projects, although we do have some affordable that have done a brick return.
And I think like ultimately, not only do we talk about passive house as kind of like a trade-off in systems and performance, but also it's a trade-off for us in design. Where are we putting the money? How do we find that balance and thread that needle between a high-performing building that looks good?
Yeah, I have to say, Dattner really does deal with that line really well. The products have always been nice. I've followed Dattner for a while now, and as a fellow architect, and I think what's nice for me specifically, if I'm being super selfish about why I was excited about today. I just do different scale. I do high-end residential retrofits. They're all low rise, and so the questions I always get are the same questions I'm asking you. How do the occupants like it? And what this shows you is at really different scales, including affordable and market rate, you're getting the performance and you're getting the design. So kudos. And we've got questions that aren't mine, although I have more. The first one is from Diana Dina. If you're still around, if you're not, I can ask your question for you. All right, I'll ask it. Was there an external passive house consultant on Chestnut Commons, or was it done in-house with just an external passive house certifier? And maybe you could talk about that as a whole, by the way. I feel like that's a question that comes up a lot. As an example, my office, a lot of us are certified. We don't do anything in-house. We outsource it all. We like being checked, before construction especially.
Right, we don't either, for the exact same reason. All of our projects have, all of the projects that we talked about today have a passive house consultant. We didn't talk so much about who the project teams are, just because that wasn't kind of like the intent of this presentation. But for these projects that we talked about, it was, Bright Power. So if, Carmela's over here, we're gonna be like, these guys. Sometimes it's Stephen Winter, sometimes it's sort of like EEA. There's a number of passive house certifiers in New York City, and we definitely use them all. We definitely don't want to be in that position. We don't want to be in that position of not being checked, and we want the client to have the benefit of having a third-party verifier there to make sure that we're really paying attention to all of this stuff. And just to kind of like, I saw this question pop up about kind of like, what's the role of a director of sustainability if you are going to hire outside of consultants? And I think really that's a question that we have also been asked by some of our consultants, like, why do you have a director of sustainability if you want me? And I think really for us, from a firm point of view, it's really about making sure that we're all talking about sustainability the same way, that we are clear about what our firm ethos is when it comes to sustainability, and that all of our projects are following that ethos. And so it's really kind of like leading that charge and making those connections, but not necessarily taking on that responsibility of being an in-house passive house.
I think that, put my mute on and off, but I think that makes a lot of sense. And we deal with a very similar issue. I would say, especially, I can't imagine for your scale. I mean, my scale, just having consistencies of decisions through projects has got to be is one of the reasons why I'm happy that we have one person here who's kind of like in charge of our details. Couldn't even imagine how important that is on your scale, because you mess up on one item, it's or not mess up, but like I'm sure you're learning the best way to do something, and I'm sure that changes constantly. So it's great to bring that learning. The next question is from Zach Simke. Is Zach still here?
I am here, and I'm unmuted, which is nice. That's not always the case for me. Yeah, so I love the layout of that you've provided for the different hooks and like considerations that you're bringing as you're selling projects. So what about the kind of the flip side and that like pitfalls? What are, as folks are thinking about landing their first decarb project and communicating about the benefits and relate potentially relating them to the regulatory or incentive frameworks and all that stuff, what should they avoid? And what do you see if you're counseling like maybe a junior member on the team who's communicating about a project for the first time? What should we not do?
Sure. I mean, I think like just having really open and clear communication is really important for all members of the team and with the client. I think we have to be really honest about that. There are some items that are going to be additional cost. And I think, what some of our clients say is they think of this as like the reverse piggy bank, where they're putting in the investment up front and it's going to take them years to recover the cost of going passive house. I think we really strive to have clear communication about you're going to have to spend more on windows. You're going to have to purchase an ERB. You're going to have to change filters in units. And make sure that the clients know what the expectations are up front, so they're comfortable when they are signing on for this kind of additional work that everyone's going to do, but they're going to own this building for a long time and they're going to be responsible for these systems. So I think communication is just super important. We love to talk about all the great things about passive house. We also talk about, here are some detailing challenges. We know how to overcome them, but they're going to be challenges. Here are the window manufacturers that are able to do this. It's more limited than in a non-passive house building, but we can overcome it. So really keeping that communication open and clear.
Yeah, I mean, that's very important. And, I just want to kind of like bring an example that happened a couple of weeks ago, not to kind of put anyone under the bus, but just this idea of like, things to keep in mind. We were having this presentation about should you do passive house, should you not? We're having a conversation rather with a client that we had worked with many times before and had familiarity with passive house. And we're working, and then a designer on the team. So we were talking about PTHP versus VRS. I think Heather talked about that when she was talking about Wish too. And then one of the designers on the team was like, "Why did you design these windows to have louvers underneath all of them?" And I just like looked at her and I was like, "Okay, but that's not really, we can work with that. That is not really a challenge." But that is one of the things that I think maybe was a misstep on my part, where I didn't kind of like prep the team ahead of time and say like, "Oh, why are you assuming VRFs when really we're trying to push for PTHPs, and what's the impact to your elevation?" Like, that's not necessarily the client's problem, that's an internal communication thing. And so I think that's one of the things about not only being upfront and communicating with the client, but also with your own design team about what does this mean for the thing that you're holding on to, that you own as we're designing this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it was definitely
Great.
like moment, and I take full responsibility.
Yeah.
At that point.
Awesome. Thank you.
So the next question was Kelsey's, but Kelsey, we kind of already touched on that, where we talked about the roles of the sustainability director and consultant. Do you have any follow-ups on that before we jump to the next question? Or any other questions you wanted to bring up if you're still here? All right, so let's keep going. Mario, are you here?
Yeah, how you doing, everybody? Can you see me? Can you hear me? Hello. Good.
Let's do it.
How you doing, ladies? First off, fantastic presentation. Good job. It's cool to see that there are a lot of people actually doing this work. It's fantastic. But let me get to my question. So my question is sort of along the line. I had to write it out. I said, with the current advancements in natural building materials, are you looking into, or are you able to include more low-embodied carbon / natural products such as wood fiber insulation products, CLT structural members, CO2 captured concrete to reduce, or other products that help reduce off-gassing and increase carbon retention? And then there's a second question. Is that a decision you make Is that a line that you're allowed to hold as a designer, and as a firm, or are you limited obviously by the commercial building requirements in New York City, by the client or by engineers and their call outs?
Right. First of
Thank
all,
you.
great question. I feel like this could be a whole presentation right here. So go for it, guys.
Heather's working on a project that's dealing with a lot of this now, so I'm gonna let her answer it, but because I can't help myself, I'm just gonna say that I think it's a little bit of A and it's a little bit of B. HPD has recently said that you have to provide a low embodied carbon spec, and there is kind of this regulatory push for low embodied carbon. And just in terms of timber, it's so exciting, but current New York City building code does not allow you to do a timber building above 85 feet, and that's not really a scale that's in our wheelhouse. Most of our buildings don't meet the requirements for mass timber, so we keep pushing for it. We keep looking at it. We keep seeing if there's discrete portions that we could do with mass timber, but we're waiting for kind of the next code cycle, which hopefully allows us to push that envelope. But I will let others speak.
Sure. We definitely need client buy-in. And on some of these items, it's an easier reach than others. Low embodied carbon concrete is becoming a pretty easy sell. It's our structural engineers have no issue with it. They're able to, find mixes that work for them. Our clients see the benefit of it, and it's usually not a big cost impact. So that's something that we've been really making sure we're getting into all of our concrete specs. As Shefali mentioned, some of the wood stuff is a little more challenging. We are pushing more towards, looking at different insulations, moving away from kind of the plastic insulations. Some of that is, about tighter restrictions in New York City with fire stopping, where we are moving more towards mineral wool. So we are, trying to make progress on that. It's such a huge and important topic. And we're doing what we can. It's very piecemeal at this point.
Okay. Well, thank you. Great presentation.
And great question. And Zach's right. So our next conference is going to be a good one, and it will cover a bunch of these topics. And good segue to a follow-up question that I think Stephen Stewart had. Stephen, are you still on?
Yes, I am. And thank you, Mario, for being the segue to my question.
Yeah,
it's something that we deal with in trying to get really small scale affordable housing built. The metrics, the return on investment metrics, will prioritize cheaper and therefore toxic building materials over healthier building materials. Yet we know from health studies from Mount Sinai and other hospitals that if we build with, there is an avoided future healthcare cost that we get by building with healthy materials and having proper ventilation. And I'm wondering if anyone is experimenting with a metric of, if you want to use the higher embodied carbon materials, which we know have more off-gassing, as Mario was talking about, we know that things like luxury vinyl tile are just really horrible for health. If you, the developer, had to pay upfront cash, $30 million for that future healthcare cost of the tenants in that building, how would that different metric turn the tables to really moving the needle toward healthier building materials?
Yeah, I'd say yes, definitely money talks in this conversation, and the health impact is particularly for our nonprofit clients who are service providers for people in our affordable housing. They're very sensitive to those material impacts on their clients, and really want to do the right thing. And they're also up against these challenges of how to get this housing financed. One of the arguments that we've tried to make is using natural materials because they're longer lasting. And so instead of using a flooring that maybe has to be replaced every 5 to 10 years, using a natural flooring that lasts 30 years and is lowering their overall, long-term costs. So we're trying to find other ways into making those arguments, because terrible as it is, there's currently no way for them to have like a financial impact of the health effects of these products. Would be great if there was like a tax on on plastics that did, make a more of a financial incentive to use natural materials. But we are trying to find kind of other arguments in terms of
Good.
insulation.
I was looking over the trail.
Financially.
And then, I work with maybe more for-profit clients than Heather does. So for them, sometimes the mission-driven argument does not resonate as much, because ultimately they want to know the impact to their bottom line. And so for them, one of the projects that we're working on actually with Mike Lynch, who I see on this call, is a passive house project in Brooklyn, where we're trying to say that can you price out this healthier material alternative spec to our typical affordable housing spec? And we're really upfront with them about difference in cost, even from difference in cost from the vendor's point of view, the difference in installation and the difference in long-term maintenance. And sometimes we're able to say okay, the vendor is saying we're talking about Kind paint, which is, a non-plastic paint instead of our acrylic, a mineral-based paint instead of our acrylic based paint. It's okay, one of their selling points is you really don't need a primer. In some areas, you can get away with it in one coat. Would we recommend one coat? Obviously not. But these are kind of ways that we talk to the owner about okay, here are the trade-offs. So maybe it's a little bit more per square foot, but it's still just as easy to purchase. And there's potential savings in material and labor. So really, again, it's all about, we've said this before, and I will keep beating this drum. It's making sure that you're talking to your clients in a way that is aligned with their value system. And there are ways to make these arguments that support them.
Yeah, I have to say, I think we all have to realize also where we are right now. We are in a place where in just a few years just now, we have gone from, can you do these buildings as passive? Will people do it? Will people make it happen? To okay, how can we do it better? I mean, most of your presentation was on, and we learned this, and we did that, and now we're looking at low embodied carbon materials. And I feel like having this community that's so forward thinking, continuously push this envelope, it's pretty exciting and truly necessary. And so, two great last questions. I'm going to do a call for a final question. If somebody feels like they didn't have a chance to ask something or wants to ask something before I throw it over to Kim. Anybody else? One last question.
Maybe people can be thinking of it as we do the announcements.
Let's do it.
Great. Thank you. And thank you. Thanks, Michael, for hopping in today as co-host. It's been great to have you. Starting off with our accelerator partner of the week, we would like to thank River Architects for their support. Let me really quickly put all the links in chat for you. Next up, a reminder to those of you who haven't yet checked out our new magazine issue, that the Passive Resiliency Strengthens Community issue of Passive House Accelerator is live. There's a link in chat for you to access that, and please help us to spread the word and check it out. Share it with your community. Next up, we have our podcast episode for the week. This is with Jesse Hunt. He is with Emergent Development out of Houston. Recently spoke at our conference last Friday. Great episode, very inspiring. So be sure to check that one out. Next up, we have a component spotlight event happening next Thursday on Halloween with Partel. This will be all about high performance building envelope systems. So there's a link in chat to register for that event. And we also have a second component spotlight event coming up with Innotek Windows and Doors. This will be with Mike Cairns on November 14th, speaking all about triple pane windows and a look beyond U values. Next, this is happening tomorrow. We have the Building Energy New York City event taking place, put on by NETSI. And our next big announcement, I'll hand over to Zach for this one, but our Reimagine Buildings Collective is finally live, and you are able to have a little sneak peek.
Yeah, absolutely. We opened the doors last week, and the formal launch was at How to Decarb, the conference we held on Friday. So this is the community where we bring together building professionals who want to step up and tackle climate change. And the theme of the month for November is landing your first decarb project. So we'll be diving deeper into some of the themes that we surfaced today with Heather and Shefali. And we'll have an Ask Me Anything session with Michael on November 1st, Friday, November 1st at noon. To kick that off, we'll also be joined for another Ask Me Anything session with another expert in residence at the Reimagine Buildings Collective, James Gepner, who is an expert in behavioral science and applying behavioral science to persuading people to do high performance and decarb buildings. So lots of great stuff. Tomorrow, we're doing our formal welcome event at the collective. So if you want to join us, please do so today, and you can join us tomorrow for that gathering. It should be fun. The membership is growing quickly, and we're super excited about it. So I think that's probably enough. But please join us.
Cool. That was great. I mean, the two things that I wouldn't mind bringing up kind of as we close this out. One is this was a great presentation, wonderful project. So thank you. The other is just to talk a little bit more about the collective and how excited I am about it. I'm always looking for kind of more conversations after these events and after these lives. And what the Reimagine Buildings Collective lets us do is keep what's going on in chat right now going. It lets me, as I'm doing a project and I want to get in touch with somebody else who is also doing a similar project, it lets us cross-pollinate. And so one of the questions that's always asked is, what happens when I get my first project or second project, or, we're probably on our 12th project right now, or passive project. How do you keep it all going? And I have to say the collective is going to be a really great resource. So check it out. Anyway, besides Yankees or Dodgers, anybody has questions, and sorry, but I'm in New York. It's got to be Yankees. So got to answer it. So, but honestly, I see the Mets hat on, and I'm so sorry. They really did well, though.
I think that it looks like that might be wrapping it up. Heather and Shefali, do you want to any last words before we close up?
Shefali's last words are going to be "Go Mets." Thanks everyone for being here. We really appreciate it, and we're really happy that this community is here, and all this mission together.
Yeah, and I think Kim gave you ways to get in touch with us if you have any questions or want to get have a sounding board of how you can do this for yourself. Feel free to reach out to either of us. We're really happy to support this. And yes, obviously, let's go Mets. I'm still bummed about it. I'm not over it. It was a good season. It was a good run, but that was
it was. They didn't. I mean, they had a good run.